What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Therapy on Two Wheels. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little different outside of motorcycling. We're going to be talking about my 10 tips for what you should think about before you accept your first startup job. Let's jump into it. So first I wanted to talk about what constitutes a company to be considered a startup. There's a few different factors. The top two factors are the number of employees within the organization as well as the funding rounds. The number of employees can be as low as one if you're starting up your own organization, or I'd say, typically under 500 employees is kind of considered a startup still. Once you get to that 700,000 to 800,000, 900,000 employees, depending again on the funding round, you're not really as much of a startup, but kind of a small organization at that point. Now, the funding rounds, typically you're going to start with the seed round for your initial funding from the investors for the company. Then you're going to go into your Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, and so forth. And typically once you get past that point, once you're around Series D, you're going to be into that small organization size. You've probably gained considerable number of employees as well as revenue at that point, especially if you're going that many rounds with investors and they're continuing to invest, and you're also getting new investors. So to start that off, if you're looking into a new organization for yourself, just understanding what is considered a startup company is the first thing that you should know. Now, the next thing that you should know is kind of the differences within the company culture from a startup organization to a much larger organization. So think about an organization like Amazon, where they have tens of thousands of employees. A startup organization, you could have 20 employees. The startups that I've worked at, I've worked for 4 startups over the past 8-9 years. The first one that I started at had about 250 employees when I started and about 400 when I left, about 3 years later. The next one had about 20 employees when I started. The third one, right around 100 employees. And the fourth one, the one that I'm currently at, that was around number 60 in the organization. And they were all at different points in time of how big they were, of how much revenue they had, what funding round that they were in. But there are noticeable differences within the company culture, especially as the company grows. For those smaller organizations, you do get more of that kind of mom and pop shop feel to it when you're working there. Pretty much everybody in the organization, especially if you only have 20 people. You talk to them pretty much on a daily basis and you get to know them really well. For some of those larger organizations, if there's 10,000 employees, you might know 100 of them. If that, maybe a little bit more, just depending on your position, if you're in HR or something like that. But for the most part, in those large organizations, you're only talking to people that are in your immediate team or just outside of that. If you are collaborating with them closely, there's probably 90% plus of the company that you have no idea who any of those people are. So the company culture with a startup organization, you're much more of a close-knit group. You do work together pretty consistently on whatever projects you're working on or whatever your product is. And it's a more welcoming feel, I'd say. The downside to that is if you don't like some of the people that you're working with, you're essentially forced to work with them every single day because there's just not that many people. And the person that you're working with, they might be the only one doing that particular job within the organization. The next thing on my list is roles and responsibilities within the job description. So anytime that you're going to apply for a job, you're looking on whatever website it is, if it's Indeed.com, they're going to have typically a job description post where it tells you kind of what your roles and responsibilities are. Now, within startup organizations, that list is kind of the bare minimum of what you're going to be doing. There are almost always things outside of the roles and responsibilities that you see on that job description that you're going to be doing in your day-to-day work. I mean, they can't fit everything on a single page or, you know, a 5-minute read. I have seen some really long posts when I've been looking for jobs in the past where it took me 15, 20 minutes to actually read it because it had every single detail about all the stuff that you'd be doing and what's required. But most of them, it's going to be a couple of minutes with the highlights of what you're going to be doing in that particular job. Now, that does not mean those are the only things that you're going to be doing, especially in a startup company. You're going to be wearing a lot of different hats. If you're hired for one particular position, that will be your main role, your main responsibility. But you're probably going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 other smaller roles within the organization of things that you're going to take on that were not within that job description. So if you're the type of person that thinks, hey, I was hired to do this, I'm only going to do this, startups are not for you at all, because you are going to be going way outside of your job description for the majority of the time that you're there in that company, because it's going to help them grow and it's going to help them be successful. They're going to do whatever they can when they hire people to help you be successful, to have you have a great career, but you got to put that effort back into the company as well. Along those same lines, because a lot of these companies are newer, especially, you know, the company I started with that had 20 employees, there wasn't really many processes in place. I was hired on to do kind of training for the software product. So the first company I worked for, it's basically been all software products for the last 8-9 years. First company I worked for was Unified Communications, which is like chat, soft phone, video conferencing. Second company I worked for was Real Estate Tech. Third company I worked for is in healthcare tech, and the fourth company I'm currently in is also healthcare tech as well. But the second company I worked for, that was Real Estate Tech, I got brought in to basically build out their training and support. And that's what I did. I did all of it. I did all of the training, all of the support for all of our customers in that particular space. And there really wasn't any processes. Our sales manager was basically the one person in sales on that organization. He was the one doing all of that before, and he hadn't written anything down. He had no processes in place. It was basically just, here's what I've been doing, handing it all over to you. You can create whatever you want. So it is nice when you're more of a creative person, or you're the person that likes to build something, likes to, you know, set your own processes. If you don't like being essentially told what to do, that can be an upside for you, because you're going to be putting a lot of those processes in place. Now, the downside to that is if things don't go well, you don't have other people to point a finger at. That's all your responsibility. That is your decisions that you've made. You create those processes, you put them in place. So sometimes it is a little bit of trial and error. You know, try something out, if it doesn't work, move on, try something different. So there's kind of good and bad with creating new processes, just depending on what type of person that you are and what you're looking for out of your job. In addition to creating those new processes, there's going to be things that come up while you're working at your job that maybe you've never come across before. You know, maybe you're just fresh out of college, or even if you're out of high school and maybe you had some experience at something, you're jumping into a startup company right after that. Whatever the situation may be for you, there's probably going to be some things that you've never come across in the past that you're going to have to figure out on your own. In these really small startups, there's usually not people that you can reach out to. Compared to a large organization with 10,000 employees, there's probably 20 people that can answer a question for you. When you're a small startup organization, if it's outside of everyone else's like scope of view, you're going to have to research that information on your own and come up with a decision and come up with an answer to whatever your question is. And again, that kind of comes back to more of that entrepreneurial mindset that a lot of people need going into a startup organization. If you're the type of person that wants to be told what to do and only goes out and does their job every day without having to think too much for yourself, that's not what startups are for. The startups, you're going to come across a lot of those situations that you're going to have to go do some research and spend hours trying to learn something new, maybe take some different courses to actually learn a tool that you've never used before. A lot of these things are going to be, the onus is put on you because you have a lot of autonomy in your particular role within that organization. The next one on my list is more about management style. Well, in your large corporate structures, you could have 5, 6, 10 different bosses or people that are above you in your position. You know, if you have a supervisor, and they report to a manager who reports to a director who reports to a VP who reports to some executive. That's that large corporate structure. When you're a small startup organization, like I'll take for instance the 20-person organization that I was in, I had one manager and the CEO. I talked to the CEO every single week, and I talked to my manager every single day. We were a much more linear management style, to where everybody was not seen as equal, but your opinions could be expressed freely. There wasn't a, hey, let me talk to my manager, then they'll talk to the director, then they have to go up to the VP. There was none of that involved with those smaller organizations. It's a much more flat or linear management style, to where you can talk to the CEO. You don't have to go through your manager first, because if you have a problem or you have an idea, you just bring it up to them. And I think that's fantastic, especially about those smaller organizations. If you are in that corporate structure and you enjoy not having to talk to the CEO or not having to talk to those executives, maybe that might be better for you. Or join a startup that has 300, 400, 500 employees, because typically you're not going to have that direct access to those executives in that size of a startup organization. Another thing to consider before you accept a job at a startup company is the benefits that they're offering. I can almost guarantee you that most startup organizations are not going to compare to the general benefits that you would get at a much larger company, particularly because they typically cannot afford it. When you're a small startup organization, you're pinching pennies. You're not going to get the top of the line healthcare plan. You're not going to be having a 401k or any type of retirement plans. You're definitely not going to have any match to those retirement plans. So there's things that you have to consider, that where you're at in your life, where you're at with your family, whether you have kids or it's just you by yourself, what type of coverage do you need? What type of things that are important to you for benefits? It might be unlimited PTO, or it can be a specific amount of PTO. So definitely take that into consideration when you are accepting a job offer for a startup, is how that is going to fit into your particular needs in life. Now, the last two things on my list kind of go together. The first one is that there is a chance of the organization being acquired when you're working at a startup. When you're working at a much larger organization, it's not as common, because typically they're doing well. They don't have other companies that are going to be buying them out. But when you're a smaller organization, especially a startup, if you're doing well, other companies are going to notice that. And especially in the tech space, you're going to have much larger organizations that are looking to either enhance their technology or enhance their product using something that's already been built. It's much harder, it takes much longer to build something yourself than just to acquire a company that's already done those things or already has that particular tool, and just incorporate it into your services or into your product. So for that reason, you could find yourself very quickly in going from a 20-person organization to a 5,000-person organization because your company got acquired. That's what happened to me when I was in my second startup job. I worked there for about 3, maybe 4 months before we went from 25 employees at that time up to about 5,000 employees, because we got incorporated or acquired by a large organization. Some of the downsides to that is the company culture is going to change. You're not going to feel like a small startup anymore. You're going to have that corporate structure. You are not going to be talking to the CEO every week. You're going to be going through 10 different people to get that message up to the top. And then just the feeling of it. That's the one downside, at least for me, which is part of the reason I've been working in startups for so long, is you feel like a number. You feel like just another number in one of those large organizations. If they lose you, no big hit. They're just going to hire somebody else to do the same exact thing. When you're in a small startup, they give you not only more responsibility, but they give you more praise for the things that you're doing. You don't feel like you're just doing a job for a paycheck. A lot of times in these startup organizations, you have more of a connection to the job. It makes you happier, makes you feel a little bit more fulfilled. So when you get acquired by those larger organizations, typically those feelings and those emotions are going to drop, because now everything is going to be shifting over to that corporate structure. So it doesn't mean that your company is going to get acquired. It really depends on the leadership, the CEO, and the people at the top, on if that's what they want, if that's their goals, or maybe their goals are to create a product, get to the point where you can be publicly traded and everybody gets a lot of money from the stocks that hopefully you're getting offered in those startups as well. So it really depends on the particular organization. The last thing on my list here is that there are chances, and sometimes high chances, of the company going under and going out of business. For startup organizations, and more particular small businesses, the chance of success is 1 out of 10. It's horrible. It is very unlikely that your company is going to hit it big if you're working for a startup. That's also part of the reason you do see a lot of people jumping from one company to the next within startups, just depending on their skill levels or what they're looking for out of a job. They may work there for 2-3 years and then move on to the next startup, kind of continue to build up those companies that are smaller into larger companies and then go back to a smaller one. However, some of these companies, and actually a good amount of them, are not going to make it through that transitional period. Whether it's their product is not doing well, they're not selling enough, there could be legal issues. One of the startups I worked for got sued my first week, which was a surprising experience. It was like a $1 million lawsuit, and for a very small company, it's a lot of money. So there's a lot of different things that could potentially happen that could cause that company to go out of business. So you need to keep that in mind. If you join a large corporate organization, you pretty much have a job. Unless you're messing something up or you're not doing well, you're probably going to have that job, and you can have it for 20 years, and you know that going into it. When you go into working at a startup organization, you don't know if you're going to have a job next week. So that uncertainty can be a little bit unsettling, especially if you're like me, you have a family, you have small children, you want to make sure that you're providing for your family. It can be a little bit unsettling to know that at any point in time, something could happen, that company can go under, and now you're out of a job, or you're in that job seeking mindset at a certain point. So that's the top 10 things I would say that you need to consider before accepting your first startup job. There's a lot more things out there. I'll be making some more of these videos on topics a little bit outside of motorcycling, just from things that I have knowledge in and experience in. So I hope you like the video. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you all in the next one.